Welcome back to Daily Wisdom from Proverbs. Today we're in Proverbs chapter 10. There's 32 verses in Proverbs 10. That's a lot. We're not going to talk about all 32. We'll read through all 32, but we're going to focus on the ones today that deal specifically with our mouth. There are 7 patterns or literary forms in Proverbs that we see on a repeated basis. I'm not going to cover all 7 today, but there's 2 primary ones you're going to see in chapter 10. One of them is called a contrasting proverb or an opposite type of a proverb where it'll talk about one subject, but it will say, here's the opposite of that. It's not this, but that. Usually those contrasting or opposite proverbs will have the word but in the middle. Not all the time, but most of the time. 29 out of the 32 verses we're going to look at today are the contrasting type of proverb to compare, to help us wisely understand a subject from 2 different perspectives. 2 of the verses we're going to look at today are the next type of proverb, and that's a similar type of a proverb, or maybe we'll call it an amplified or an echoing type of a proverb, where it'll take a subject and it'll talk about the issue, and then it'll amplify that a second time. And then there's one verse in here that's a third type we're not going to talk too much about today. So you ready? Proverbs chapter 10, starting at verse 1. We're going to pause only at the verses that deal with our mouth. Here we go. The Proverbs of Solomon. A wise son makes a glad father, but a foolish son is a sorrow to his mother. Treasures gained by wickedness do not profit, but righteousness delivers from death. The Lord does not let the righteous go hungry, but he thwarts the craving of the wicked. Verse 4, a slack hand causes poverty, but the hand of the diligent makes rich. He who gathers in summer is a prudent son, but he who sleeps in harvest is a son who brings shame. Blessings are on the head of the righteous, but the mouth of the wicked conceals violence. The memory of the righteous is a blessing, but the name of the wicked will rot. The wise of heart will receive commandments, but here's a verse that deals with our mouth, but a babbling fool will come to ruin. We'll talk more about a babbling fool in a minute. Verse 9, whoever walks in integrity walks securely, but he who makes his ways crooked will be found out. Verse 10, whoever winks the eye causes trouble, and, not a but here, and, it's an amplified, echoing kind of a verse, and a babbling fool will come to ruin. Let's pause there for a second. Here's our very first verse in chapter 10. That's not a contrast, it's an amplified. Whoever winks the eye causes trouble. What does that mean? Well, usually when you're winking at somebody, it's not a flirtatious kind of a winking. The winking I think he's talking about here is the kind of winking you do when you're trying to let somebody know you're not really telling the truth. It's deceptive kind of winking. And so what he's saying here is that the person who's a winker, the person who's deceptive in his nature, tends also to be a babbling fool. Just talks on and on and on. And we'll see more about that later in this passage. And both those types of people, verse 10 says, comes to ruin. Let's continue on, more about the mouth. Verse 11, the mouth of the righteous is what? A fountain of life. But, contrast, the mouth of the wicked conceals violence. Not honest, not truthful. Verse 12, hatred stirs up strife, but love covers all offenses. Underline that verse in your Bible, circle it, do whatever you have to do. That one's a good one. I wish we had more time to cover it today, but it's not consistent with the theme of what we're looking at. Maybe next month when you go through chapter 10, dive deep into verse 12. Verse 13, here's more about our lips, our mouth. On the lips of him who has understanding, wisdom is found. But a rod is for the back of him who lacks sense. The wise lay up knowledge, but the mouth of a fool brings ruin near. Verse 15, a rich man's wealth is his strong city, The poverty of the poor is their ruin. That's also a contrast in there, even though the word but isn't in the middle, but it's contrasting rich and poor. Verse 16, the wage of the righteous leads to life, the gain of the wicked to sin. Also a contrast there between righteous people and wicked people. Verse 17, whoever heeds instruction is on the path of life, but he who rejects reproof leads others astray. Verse 18, the one who conceals hatred has lying lips, and whoever utters, that's what we do with our mouth, whoever utters slander is a fool. Verse 19, we're going to hover here for a minute. When words are many, transgression is not lacking. Pause there for a second. When words are many, transgression is not lacking. I think at one time or another in our lives, we have been babbling fools where we just talk and talk and talk and talk. And either we're talking just to hear ourselves talk, and that's a form of vanity, or we're talking because we have an opinion on every subject under the sun, and we feel we have to get our opinion in there and tell people what they're doing and tell people, how we feel about certain things and how we feel about them. And sometimes that's an attitude issue God needs to reveal in our hearts. So what he's saying here, as a general statement, is when words are many, transgression is not lacking. That's usually an indication that there's some sin going on, some attitude issue in our lives. It's not necessarily the words themselves that are the transgression. It's what's underneath the surface. It's the root of what we're saying. Pay attention when words are many in your own life, when you find yourself talking more than you find yourself listening. But this is a contrast. When words are many, transgression is not lacking, but here's a verse for me and for all of us. Whoever restrains his lips is prudent. Take some time to restrain your lips. Listen more than you speak. Verse 20, the tongue, here it is again, of the righteous is choice silver. The heart of the wicked is of little worth, a contrast. The lips of the righteous feed many, but fools die for lack of sense. Here in verse 22, we see the second of our amplifying or echoing kind of verses. The blessing of the Lord makes rich, and he adds no sorrow with it. There's no sorrow that comes with the blessing of the Lord. Verse 23, doing wrong is like a joke to a fool, but wisdom is pleasure to a man of understanding. Verse 24 says, what the wicked dreads will come upon him, but the desire of the righteous will be granted. When the tempest passes, the wicked is no more, but the righteous is established forever. Verse 26 is the only verse in chapter 10 that is not one of those first two types of proverbs I told you about. This one is a comparison or a metaphor type of proverb. We'll talk about that in future days. But it says, like vinegar to the teeth and smoke to the eyes, so is the sluggard to those who send him. Then we get back into all the rest, which are all contrasts. Verse 27, the fear of the Lord prolongs life, but the years of the wicked will be short. The hope of the righteous brings joy, but the expectation of the wicked will perish. The way of the Lord is a stronghold to the blameless, but destruction to evildoers. Verse 30, the righteous will never be removed, but the wicked will not dwell in the land. And then finally, the last two verses, both dealing with our mouth, our tongue, our lips. Verse 31, the mouth of the righteous, what does it bring forth? It brings forth wisdom. But the perverse tongue will be cut off. And the lips of the righteous know what is acceptable, but the mouth of the wicked know what is perverse. Daily wisdom for today from Proverbs chapter 10. The focus we had was on our mouth, and I pray that as the day goes on, as the week goes on, you will walk in wisdom, especially in regards to the words you speak and how you interact with other people. God bless you. I'll see you tomorrow.